Article, Board President.
Lisa Botto, Board Vice President.
Paul Feller, Board Trustee.
John Farrell, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Patrick Harrigan, Deputy Superintendent.
And before we get going, I would just like to read a quick statement to open the meeting. Under the Open Meetings Law, the audio or videotaping of a public school board meeting is legal as long as it remains unobtrusive and does not disrupt or interfere with the deliberative process or the right of persons in attendance to observe or listen to the proceedings. Although the district is not recording, the public should be advised that this meeting is subject to being taped, and thus, that any comments, questions, or statements made during the public portions of this meeting may appear in print or online, including YouTube or other websites. And I'll hand it over to Mrs. Farrell.
Thank you, Mrs. Berrywood. And it is my great honor to introduce the principal of Vanderbilt Elementary School, Mrs. Wiltshire.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the faculty and staff that are joining us tonight from Vanderbilt, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thanks for being here tonight. It's always a pleasure to host a board meeting, and it's become somewhat of a tradition for us to highlight the work of our student council. We have been growing in size over the years. Our student council membership has increased significantly, and this year we have a whopping 106 member student council. They do a lot of good work, and although I will say that nobody volunteered to shovel my driveway at all this winter, we're talking about that, all right? They've done a lot of great work, and here to share some of that work with you are the students and the two club advisors who I'd like to introduce to you right now. One of is Mrs. Catherine Hominides and Mrs. Sharon Kaplan.
Hi, welcome. We're very excited to be here. As Mr. Rocha said, we have grown in numbers to 106. And I guess the most wonderful thing to share is that these kids have really come together and not only have done wonderful things within our school, but have really reached out into the community and have thought of creative ideas of how they can help others. And without further ado, it is our great pleasure to introduce to you our student council. It's a few members of each of our clubs that are here to just give you a snippet into the insight of the great things that are going on in our school. So thank you. You know that voice you never use in the classroom?
All right, well, I'm going to do that. We're going to start working on this. All right?
Reporters go to the classrooms in grades K through 5 and inform the students and teachers about what's happening in student council. The reporters communicate to all of the classes why our student council activities are important and how they can help. Our fundraising committee works with a few other committees to raise Detroit Big Systems.
That was a little plug, by the way, and in those books.
Our Super Bowl fundraiser was a huge success. Our Vanderbilt families donated cans of soup in January that we donated to the Gerald J. Ryan Outreach Center in London. We collected over 1,500 cans of soup. The peer resolution group helps children in Vanderbilt with situations that they are having trouble solving on their own. We help children in kindergarten through fifth grade. Our program is a really planned fundraising at student council. We raise money and awareness for breast cancer through the American Cancer Society. We run a different fundraiser each month. So far, we've raised over $1,600. The celebration days of not only planning fun activities, but everything else. It's important to help out people, especially the people in your own community. The celebration makes community wants to make Vanderbilt casual, a fun, and helpful place. Our soul committee is raising money for the district soul program. Vanderbilt's way of raising awareness and showing our support for people with autism. This program goes on throughout the year. Our newsletter committee runs the student council report. It's a website that tells you about all the different things that are going on in our school and in student council. Pennies per Patient is a program in which Vanderbilt students donate pennies to Coach. To raise money for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. We will be running this fundraiser in April. Our Toys for Tots committee ran a toy drive for the United States of America. So many of our Vanderbilt families donated a gift for children in need. We helped the Marines load all of the toys onto the big trucks. Vanderbilt showed how they can help children who are less fortunate. The people in Reaching Yale think about ways they can help out in the community and our school to help make lives better. For example, we made cards for the wonderful staff members in Vanderbilt for the holidays to thank them for all that they do for us.
We'll continue to work on the sound system. But as you can see, we have 14 different committees for student council, and they make a big difference. And for the record, I've never heard them this quiet in their existence. But I'd like to turn it back over to you. Thank you for being here, everybody, and to Mrs. Fallon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vanderbilt Student Council may have had soft voices, but they did speak volumes of tremendous work that they do, not only for their school here at Vanderbilt, for the community at large, and even beyond our capital jurisdiction walls. So they are just amazing students, and we appreciate all of them. But thank you, students, for being with us. I'd just like to take one additional moment to mention that today the Asset Conference was held at the Huntington Hilton, and we had Mrs. Hominides and Mrs. Brundenberg from Vanderbilt at the conference with Vanderbilt students speaking to the educational professionals, and they were amazing. The work that they spoke about in terms of the use of technology and what was happening inside of their classrooms was a tremendous tribute to the Vanderbilt School and the Capitol Hill community. In attendance today, Mrs. Betty DiSabato, Mrs. Nakapura, Mrs. Vitaliata, and myself had an enjoyable day being with our students and our staff, and we couldn't be about it. So thank you for the girls that were there.
will be providing a budget presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Fallon. Okay, we are deep into development of the 2015 school year budget. So tonight we'll take you through, this is our second budget workshop. We had a budget workshop last week, which we had our administrators come up and present the different ideas and comments and content for some enhancements to our curriculum that we're looking for, including into the 2015-16 budget. And I'll summarize a little bit of that here and then take you through some key components of the budget process and where we're at. So the first part, what we'll talk about. We'll speak about revenues as we always do. This year, as it's been for the past 4 years, we need to look at revenues first, unfortunately, because in the past we did not have the constraints of state aid that has been flat for years, as well as having a property tax levy that is now a formula. We generate our tax levy, what we collect from residents in the form of property taxes for the school district based on a formula, and we default to what that number is. So we create a revenue picture first, and then we back into what we're able to do educationally through the expenditure side. So then we'll move into expenditures, and then some next steps, some initiatives, some new things that are on the table for this year from the state. So this is generally what our revenue picture looks like. Overall, the pie does not change from year to year. Our property tax levy in this district is the biggest portion of our revenue, and that is simply by design. It is an indicator of wealth in the community. When you go through different communities, you'll see this picture looks very different in some communities that are lower wealth. The red would be state aid, and it would be property tax levy. But our formula provides us with a property tax levy, which is that red piece of the pie, which is about 80% of our budget revenue. And then you can see our next biggest piece that helps to fund our expenditures is state aid. And then you can see pieces behind that, use of fund balance, other revenue, and we'll go through that. So the property tax levy cap, it was what was called the 2% property tax levy cap 4 years ago. We are in our 4th year. We've learned a lot about the formula. We've learned there are a lot of constraints and challenges with adhering to the formula, and pieces that I'm sure the state could not have anticipated. Some districts have negative tax levy increases by following the formula. I'm sure that was not the intent. And other districts like us, and probably most districts, have never hit a 2% property tax levy number. It just simply doesn't work that way. So there was a lot of learning, and we had spoken 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, about what it is and what it isn't. So I'll just summarize what it is and what it isn't very quickly for those lots of new faces I'm really happy to see today. So year 4, it's not a cap on your taxes. It is a cap on what I am able to raise in my total levy, which is that red portion of the pie of our revenue budget. So the tax levy, what I collect in taxes, almost $200 million, that is the tax levy. That's what I levy in taxes for the residents in the school district. It's not the tax rate. What you see on your tax bill is the tax rate. As a homeowner, what the town does is they look at your assessed value. The state looks at something called an equalization rate to get this tax rate. The two are very different concepts. Unfortunately, they get blurred out in the public, and so when we go out with the tax levy, which is what our formula provides to us, the formula dictates what that number is. That's what we collect in taxes. And then we go on the flip side and look at our tax bill and say, but Anne Marie said it was going to be 1.7%. Why is my tax bill not 1.7% more in my school district taxes? And it's because they're just different concepts. The tax rate concept is much more complicated in that what the town does is they assess the assessed values. They determine assessed values for every one of our homes. And assessed value is a number, an arbitrary number put on our homes, which does not relate to the market value. It's not what you can sell your home for. It's just a number for taxing purposes. How our town does it in Huntington, how it is in Babylon, how they do it across the state varies from town and municipality to municipality. So that assessed value is something we wait for. When it goes up or down, that impacts what you pay in taxes on your home. The town of Huntington versus town of Babylon issue that we have here. We're split in 2 towns. Most of our residents are in the town of Huntington, but some are in the town of Babylon. And how those 2 communities get split in
terms of assessed value and how each town determines their assessed value, it complicates the issue even more. What the state does is they come in and say, we're going to try and fix that, and we're going to put this thing called an equalization rate in the mix. And that essentially is trying to take municipalities and towns like ours who create assessed values not related to market value. So your assessed value is this random number applied to your home, and they apply this thing called an equalization rate to try and level the playing field so that when taxes are levied, it's fair and equitable. That's the concept. You could probably argue that point in a whole separate conversation. But those three pieces that determine the tax rate are not ours. Those are pieces that are provided to us as homeowners from different organizations. The state provides the equalization rate, and the towns provide those two other bubbles. What we create is the tax levy. What we don't collect from the state in terms of aid and other revenue and payments in lieu of taxes, all pieces I'll go through, what we don't collect from those other sources, we must collect from the tax levy. So that's how we get the levy, and then it creates a tax rate, which is a different concept in terms of how that impacts your tax rate. So I've had many conversations with residents. I'm glad you're calling, asking the questions, but maybe that helps to create a little bit of clarity. If you have questions, I'd be happy to take you through your individual tax bill at that point. But different concepts, they got blurred when this whole concept came out 4 years ago. We can pierce the cap, so we have this formula. Every district has the same formula. What's different is the numbers we put in the formula are different from district to district. I'm putting in my numbers, and Comac and Jericho are putting in their numbers. So we will always get to a different result. That's simply the nature of the math of the equation. Same equation, we all get different results. It's rarely 2%. On the next slide, I'll show you how it's very different than 2%. And again, that was one of the misnomers, one of the learnings that we had, that it was supposed to be 2% represented the cost of living increase, and that hasn't been the cost of living increase in 4 years since this formula was designed by the state. We follow the same formula. We have pieces of the formula that were required to enter in. Very specifically, the issue we had this year was that we needed state aid numbers. So one of the pieces of the formula relates to capital exemptions. I need a state aid number or numbers to put in the formula to then be able to populate and get a result to get the percent increase. And we didn't get state aid projections this year, and I'll speak about that in a few minutes, but we didn't get the number, so we're being required by the state to submit data, and we did that February 28th, the state controller's office. We all have to go on and enter in the information onto an online database, which we did, but the reality is the state couldn't provide us with certain components that we needed to complete their own formula. So it's a little bit confusing, but it's the way in which these things work. So we submitted numbers, and we know the numbers that we submitted could change because we hope to get the state aid numbers at one point before the board adopts the budget. But those are just pieces to be aware of, and if the number changes, it would be because of that last bullet, because we finally got state aid numbers that we were waiting for and should have gotten in January. What the board has decided, once again, there has been no indication from the board that we're looking to pierce the cap. That has not been part of our conversation in the past 4 years. So what that means is we put our numbers into the formula, we generate a result, a total tax levy, and that's the number we go with. We don't look to get more than that number. If we were looking to get more than that number, raise the taxes higher than that, that would be called piercing the cap. I'm sure you've heard some districts have done that successfully and others have not done that successfully. And lots of challenges come when you try to pierce the cap. And many districts have done it for good reason. We don't need to do that here. So we need a simple majority in May, which means of the voters that come out to vote, half plus one need to say yes to the budget for us to have an approved budget. When we did all this work, we resulted in a property tax levy cap of 2.42%. And that's as of the data we know as of Friday. So what that means in terms of hard numbers is that our total property tax levy, which is the red part of that pie, of $191 million, that's now going to increase 2.42%. And the result will be a $4.6 million increase, which brings us to $195.5 million. And that is what we now know will be the red part of our pie. So of our revenue picture, the state has essentially indicated that's the number you can put in for the red part of your pie, which is the most significant part of our revenue. So when you look at that, the property tax levy cap, this is what we've been at for the past couple of years, and those are the percent. So we're looking at for 15-16, and you'll see my little commentary on the bottom. All the 15-16 data is estimated. It's as of Friday. This is a work in progress, so many pieces can and will change. But when you look at the differences year after year, the formula has not changed. We've asked for the formula to change. We've asked for modifications to happen. It hasn't been, no one's received that well at the state level. So we resulted in a little bit under 2.5, almost 3, about 1.8, I think that was, or 1.6, and now we're looking at 2.42. That's the formula, and probably the biggest piece of that is it never was 2%. So we need to understand that's the 2% property tax levy cap. We're looking at going out with that 2.42% for this upcoming year. And then when you just look at that in terms of the total tax levy, we've been hovering between $180 and $195 million. And so that's been the history of the total dollar amount that we've collected since this property tax levy cap formula has been in place. And that helps to dictate one enormous part of our revenue picture. The next piece is state aid. And the state aid piece is particularly frustrating this year because when the governor had his State of the Opportunity Address, which occurs in January, school districts right after that public address, we anxiously wait our state aid data. And I think I've posted up here very exciting state aid runs, which they're called, and there are lots of numbers. They show you what you're projected to get this year, and then they project forward on the bottom of that sheet what you're expected to get next year. And we typically get that the day after this public meeting. We didn't get them this year, and there are a number of reasons why we didn't. But one of the challenges that we have is that not only do I now have that big question mark in my formula that we just talked about, because once I get my state aid numbers, I had to estimate what I thought it would be, not knowing what's going on in the legislature and with the governor. I had to estimate a number, and then now I also have then that other part of my pie that is a question mark. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't have an aid run. I don't have any estimate from the state to tell me that this is what they project I will receive in aid for the following school year. So we're expected to still adhere to all the guidelines, the March 1st data that we have to submit to the controller, which we did on February 28th. We have to get our budget publicly approved by our board has to adopt our budget, and then voters have to approve our budget. And this is the grand of this. We're waiting for this key piece of data, but none of the expectations of school districts has changed, even though this is going on at the state. And essentially what's happening is the governor has proposed some reforms, some educational reforms. It's been out in the media. The purpose of this meeting is not to go through what those are, but simply to say, if those reforms are rejected by the legislature, then what happens is the aid becomes generally 1.7% of an increase. And that's tied to a commitment the governor made a number of years ago regarding tying the aid increases to increases in property, in personal income growth. So that figure came out to be 1.7%, and that's where that number comes from. It's from this personal income growth fact. But even though there's going to be a total growth, no district can receive more than it received this year. What that means for us is a big question mark. I don't know. I don't have the runs. I have no data from the state to indicate what that means for us. But what I do know is that the formulas, even if the formulas don't change, because everything at the state is a formula, if the formulas don't change, we know that enrollment and wealth and expenditures are three key items that drive the formulas. So if enrollment goes down, they call it ADA, average daily attendance, if that goes down or up, your aid will go down or up, because it's a factor in the formula. If your wealth factors go down or up, that will impact aid. And then if your expenditures go up or down, that will impact the expense-driven aids, because if you don't spend the money, you don't get a portion of that money back in the following year. So to say that, there's a 1.7% bottom line number of an increase is absolutely not what we're projecting, because we know it's not going to happen. We don't know what it's going to mean to us if the legislature rejects it, but we know the max would be no more than we got this year. If the legislature agrees to what the governor has thrown out there as his reform agenda, then what we know is that there's an additional $1.1 billion, or a 4.8% increase in aid. Again, all of those different metrics have to be factored in, and we have to wait for our aid runs. in years past, we've known that aid has increased 5% or 6% or 3%, and then you'll look at Half Hollow Hills and say, I just read a news day that the aid for education is going up whatever the percent is. What happened? And the reality is that's the total pot. But what it means for you is different. You here at Half Hollow Hills or you in a different district is different because they have to then run those formulas through and determine what we get here versus what another district gets. What would happen though is the total increase would be 4.8, and you probably heard us complain, New York City will always get what they need, and then kind of what remains comes downstate to us. And that inequity has been something that we've been fighting for years to try and get some equity in the way that aid is distributed. But the reality is whether it's 1.7 or whether it's 4.8, we don't know what it means to us. What we know is that the legislature has been speaking a lot about eliminating the GEA, which is that gap elimination adjustment. And in a nutshell, what that is that you have all these formulas, and the formulas did what they needed to do, and they said, Half Hollow, you get $30 million. That's what you deserve based on the formulas. But they didn't have $30 million for us, or 50 for another district, or 100 for another district, and they took money off the top. So I owe you 1,000, but I don't have it, so I'm going to give you 20 bucks, and then I owe you the rest. And that's been happening year after year. So we have in our budget currently, we've lost $4 million in state aid today in our 14-15 budget because of this GEA. Over the course of a number of years, it's 20 million, 25 million for us, not for the state, for us. That's money that everyone agrees is ours, but that we can't get because the state doesn't have the money. We are hoping that the legislature's understanding of this challenge for school districts comes to fruition, and at a minimum, even if you don't change the formulas or do a lot of the fixes that need to happen, at least eliminate this GEA. Get rid of it because it shouldn't have been there to begin with. So we'll hopefully see where this lands. The date is April 1st. That is when the state is supposed to have their approved budget. We're hoping for a state-approved budget. We don't know where it's going to land, but if they don't have their budget by April 1st, and we have then essentially 2 weeks after that to have our board adopt a budget, we're adopting a budget with one huge question mark in the middle, which is really unfortunate, but we'd be in the same boat as every other school district. So we hope to have more information right after April 1st. In terms of state aid, one of the pieces that we always look at, and again, you may have heard us speak about this ad nauseum, but you look at where state aid is as a factor of the total budget. So state aid, this represents going back to 2002-03, and this is our estimate for 14-15, because we don't have all the money in yet. And then you have 15-16, where we're projecting. And you look at what that cycle is. So that's a percent of aid funding our budget. So we hit a peak of about 14% back in 08-09 and 09-10, and then we were anywhere from 13% to about 11.5. But the key piece, and we communicate this on the top of the mountains, but the key piece is that if you look at the aid that we've gotten, that we're expected to get next year, we can't, it doesn't even show on the graph how far back that number is. So if we look at aid as a percent of our total budget, the state has lessened their support of education on Long Island. This is not a graph that's going to be very different district to district, but the state has reduced their level of financial support for school districts that you'd have to go back before 2002-03 to find a year that the state had actually committed more than what they're committing today to education. And that's a huge statement. So we continue to fund our budgets locally because the state has really not committed their, helped their into the bargain. And there were efforts back in 2005 and 6 to have the formulas changed to be able to address that inequity because the state acknowledged there was a funding inequity. But it just simply never happened because once those formulas were put in place, they were immediately frozen because the state realized we're not funding education to that level, and then we've now essentially been in this flat level of support for many, many years. And that's part of the conversation point with our legislators. Some of us were just in Albany, and we were speaking to them about this exact fact that the commitment of the state to funding education here at this district, but across Long Island, has really been pretty abysmal. So that's an interesting graph that we always go back to. So that's state aid. Lots of questions still. We hope to get some answers. Payments in lieu of taxes or pilots is our next largest source of revenue. This is another area that we struggle with because the data comes from a third source. And the two different groups that they come from, the information comes from, is the Suffolk County IDA and then the Babylon IDA. Each of these IDAs, they're development agencies that try to keep businesses here on Long Island for jobs and growth, and they get tax incentives to do so. So they don't pay property taxes the way that a regular business would because they're getting an incentive, essentially a reduction in their taxes, and that payment then comes to a school district and other taxing authorities in the form of a pilot. So they're not on the tax rolls where they would generate more money, they're getting some benefit to stay here on Long Island. So the Suffolk County IDA, the piece that I think is important for everyone to know are that the numbers that we get, we work with the Suffolk County IDA and the Babylon IDA to identify what we think those budget lines will be, what we think the revenue will be for those two pieces. Because they represent a significant source of revenue for us. And the swings is what makes it so difficult. So when you look at that red mass, what that represents is what the Suffolk IDA provided to us as an estimate in each of those years. They said this is what, based on the agreements, because they have the agreements, they know what companies they made agreements with to keep them here on Long Island and give them some tax abatement. This is what it's going to generate in revenue for your district. And then the reality is the blue line represents what we got. Some years we get nothing, and other years we get a double payment or a triple payment based on an agreement that just came to be, or some agreement that was supposed to have fallen off and never did, so they're still paying a pilot instead of going on the tax rolls. But this is a very standard dynamic, and we said, well, maybe it's just unique for Suffolk County, and in fact it's not, because if you look at the Babylon IDA arrangements, it's the same kind of thing. The purple represents what they are indicating, it's going to be our revenue stream, and then you can see the pink. We love it when it's up here, when we get more than we thought, but then when you're looking at a year like this year, where they told us we were getting almost 2.8 million, and we're going to get about 1.7 million, that's it. And the reality is, this is information coming from the IDAs